Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hauser Wirth. I'm Russell Salmon. Oh, there we go. I'm Russell Salmon, Director of Public Programs here at the Gallery, and it's such a thrill to see this packed house for our symposium today that occurs on the occasion of the opening weekend of Eva Hesse 5 sculptures at our 22nd Street Gallery. And we're so excited to have all of our guests here for Eva Hesse, looking back at a voice for the future. The new exhibition at Hauser Wirth 22nd Street celebrates the 25th anniversary of the Hesse Estate's representation by the gallery and is organized by Barry Rosen, longtime advisor to the estate, in collaboration with art historian and critic Bryony Fair. The show reunites 5 of Hesse's most celebrated large-scale works, all on loan from major American museums, and all made in the most intense period at the end of Hesse's life from 1967 to 1969. If you have not seen the show, it is open until 6 p.m. today and is just a short walk away. Today's program will consist of 3 parts. The first part, Foundation, will feature a conversation with Helen Hesse Charash, Eva Hesse's sister, along with 2 curators essential to the historic lineage of past Hesse exhibitions, Linda Shearer and Helen Cooper. The talk will be moderated by our very own Senior Curatorial Director, Kate Fowle. After a short 10-minute break, we'll move into our second part, welcoming Paris-based art historian and critic Élisabeth Lebovici for a presentation titled Area, Aught, Augment, Repetition 19, Expanded Expansion. We'll take one last break before our third and final talk, Conservation, when we will hear from Guggenheim Museum conservators Lena Stringari and Esther Chao, who are responsible for the restoration of Hesse's monumental sculpture, Expanded Expansion, and they will be joined by Barry Rosen. After we conclude this afternoon, we'd love to welcome you all to the Roth Bar next door for a celebratory drink. I also want to mention that the Hauser Wirth Publishers has just released the beautiful book Eva Hesse Exhibitions 1972 to 2022, exactly, which was edited by Barry Rosen and includes writings from Linda Shearer, Lena Stringari, and also Helen Cooper, whose essay title in the book, Looking Back at a Voice for the Future, is also the title of our symposium today. Just quickly before we get started, if for any reason you need to leave the space at any point during the symposium, we just ask that you go up the stairs and someone will help you get down to the first floor rather than out the stage. And now a little about our distinguished panelists for our first talk, Foundation. Born in Hamburg, Helen Hesse Charash and her younger sister Eva Hesse were put on a Kindertransport to Holland shortly after Kristallnacht. In 1939, the Hesse family was able to immigrate to America and settled in Washington Heights. Helen went on to graduate with honors from Hunter College, marry, and have 2 children before going back to earn a master's degree in library science. After her sister's untimely death in 1970, while still working full-time in the school system, Helen took on managing her sister's estate and immersed herself in navigating the art world. She was mentored and guided by Donald Droll and later Barry Rosen. Together with Barry Rosen, they guided the representation of the artist to important galleries, initially 4K Droll, then Droll Colbert, and later Robert Miller. The Estate of Eva Hesse is now part of the Hauser Wirth family. Her passionate commitment to protect the legacy of her sister continues to this day. During Helen Cooper's 39-year tenure at the Yale University Art Gallery, 34 of which she served as senior curator of the department, she demonstrated an impressive range and depth of knowledge of American art history. The remarkable scope of Cooper's expertise, from colonial portraiture to modern American painting, helped form what is now considered one of the preeminent museum collections of American art in the country. During her term as curator, Cooper enriched many areas of the collection and also moved it in new directions. The area of greatest growth during her term was in modernist paintings and sculpture of the first half of the 20th century, with acquisitions of exceptional works by Thomas Hart Benton, Oscar Blumner, Alexander Calder, Stuart Davis, and Gerald Murphy, among others. In addition to growing the American art collection in significant ways, Cooper organized several important exhibitions that reveal an equally impressive scope and command of the field, including Eva Hesse, a retrospective, 1992, which was accompanied by a scholarly publication. Cooper received her BA from Syracuse University and her MA and PhD from Yale University. She is the recipient of several outstanding honors, including an appointment in 2002 as member of the Committee for the Preservation of the White House. Linda Shearer, currently based in Houston, Texas, has held a variety of art-related positions there, currently as interim director of the Blaffer Art Museum at the University of Houston, as well as at the Center of Photography in Houston and the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft. She arrived in Houston in 2007 to serve as interim director at the Contemporary Arts Museum, Houston. She then became the executive director of Houston's renowned Project Row Houses from 2009 to 2015. Prior to coming to Houston, she served as director of the Contemporary Arts Center in Cincinnati, Ohio, and from 1989 to 2004 at the Williams College Museum of Art, Williamstown, Massachusetts. After graduating with a Bachelor's of Arts degree from Sarah Lawrence College, she worked at the Guggenheim Museum for 11 years before becoming director in 1980 at one of the earliest alternative spaces in the country, Artist Space, also in New York. She served as curator in the Painting and Sculpture Department at the Museum of Modern Art in New York from 1985 to 1989 and was responsible for the project series there. Thank you all again for being with us today. And with that, please join me in welcoming Helen Hesse Charash, Helen Cooper, Linda Shearer, and Kate Fowle.
I have to say that it's quite terrifying sitting next door to three Jedis. But it's also a real honor. So it's fantastic that you're sitting here together today. And I couldn't think of a better way to lay the foundation, both for this symposium, but also for people to be able to get some of the thoughts out of you, from you, about your experiences of working for and with the Eva Hesse's work and thinking about her life and her production. So I just want to get an idea about who we're looking at in the audience so that we know who we're talking to. How many of you, this is the first time you've been to a symposium about Eva Hesse? Okay, good. So there's lots of new people to Eva's, like, a conversation. And I know Elizabeth Sussman is here and Barry Rosen, of course, is here. But who else is there in the audience who is kind of an expert or has, like, worked with Eva Hesse, or there you go. Amazing. Yes. So that's fantastic. So we also have experts in the audience that are going to check up on anything we say. Documentary. Sorry. There's Karen, there you go. So there's a number of people who are also experts in the audience. And I have to say that the person who is missing today is Bryony Fair, who is very sad that she couldn't be here. I know that Barry and Bryony have been in close conversation for a while about this exhibition. And I have just come back from London, and I talked to her in London, and she, among many, many things, said something that I have heard over and over again, which is, well, two important things, she says. One of them is, Helen, the fact that so much of all of this, the real foundation of the foundation is your generosity. This is something that I just heard the two of you say today, Barry's told me this. This is kind of, if we're going to talk about what's at the foundation of the foundation, that's what I hear from everybody. So I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about that in a minute. The other foundations that we have is this incredible show. These are 5 works, as Russell has explained, from 1967 to 69. But also what's interesting in light of what's going to be coming up in this symposium is that all 5 of them are part of very important collections in the United States. From the Wexner in Ohio, the Museum of Modern Art, the Guggenheim, I've got to try and remember that, Glenstone Museum and the Berkeley Art Museum. So we're going to talk a little bit later about conservation and about all of this, but it's also something I'm going to bring up here because the foundations of how these works have gone into collections is also important. This book that Barry put together, I have to say, I cheated and read it before. But it's incredible because it's very unusual to actually hear from 16 different curators talking about the 13 shows that have happened around Eva's work from 1972 to 22. And it's the dedication of so many different people who have put their ideas and thoughts, I'm sure in conversation with you every time and with Barry, but to actually have the opportunity to learn from curators what they're thinking is fantastic. So, and then 25 years with Hauser Wirth. I mean, that's incredible. 25 years of working on thinking through what a legacy might be and what it might be into the future. So we're going to touch on all those topics right now. And I'm going to start, Helen, if you don't mind, with you, because I would love to understand. I'm sure it's very difficult. This is 50 years of your life. But how did you know what to do when you first started, and how has that developed over time? Can you talk a little bit about what happened?
I didn't know what to do when it started. I was completely outside the art world, but I had wonderful guidance right from the get-go, and that was Donald Droll. And he mentored me, and as a matter of fact, and I don't know how it was decided for the Guggenheim to do their retrospective, shortly after Eva died, and Donald and Linda came to my home, and I remember it clearly. And, I knew that Donald loved Eva. So it was very easy to follow his guidance. I never thought of anything different. I think maybe it was the values my parents implanted in us, but Eva was at the cusp. Things were happening. She was in major exhibitions. Her contingent was on the cover of Art Forum. So how could you not? Everything was a logical, step by step. And the Lucy Lepard book, which was problematic and needed help and life support all along the way, because every possible conceivable problem that could happen happened during those several years. Lucy did her work, that was fine, but then everything went wrong or whatever. It was more and more expensive and more difficult. And actually, a family friend whose name is Mark Muller, he was the attorney who guided me all through Eva's, from the time Eva was ill. He stepped in, and really somehow we connected with Yale, and the rest is history.
What's interesting is how long that history has evolved, though, because when the book kind of points to this a little bit, but Brian, he was saying, Kate, don't let Helen not talk about the fact that there have been generations and generations of people, it's 50 years, who have been interested in Eva's work. And we're going to hear about some of those very early shows. But there's something very special about the fact that in the way that Brian has explained it, and then with what Barry has been doing with you for a number of years, is making space for different people's ideas. How does that work?
When you're not educated in art history, it's very easy to accept the advice, especially, and they were all, one of the real pluses that came out of these 50 years that I have missed my sister. I don't have any family except my wonderful family in Israel and California, was the friendships of people who really cared about Eva Hesse. So it was very easy to follow the guidance. And I don't know, it was just putting one step forward. I would never have thought of anything different. And my family knows how important protecting the legacy of this incredible artist is. And everyone understands it. And they're all here. They're all as many as could be possibly. And that's it. I don't feel I deserve any credit. This is a labor of love. Of love. And of knowing that I happen to be related to somebody who was incredible, who was ahead of her times, who was, they always ask, how was it to be growing up with a genius? Well, I didn't know that. We were sisters, we played house, we played school, and we fought.
So, to move on, I'm coming back to you, don't worry, but to move on.
Relax.
Yeah. Do you want to you can put your microphone down here for a bit if you want. Linda, first, 1972, the first kind of large-scale exhibition, but it wasn't your first exhibition working with Eva Hesse's work.
That's true. I keep forgetting that myself. I would like to acknowledge Donald Droll as well, and I was a curatorial assistant at the Guggenheim, working for Diane Waldman and Edward Fry, and Diane was a great mentor to me, and I became close to her husband, Paul Waldman, who ran the gallery at the School of Visual Arts. And some of you may remember that. And he said we were talking, and I graduated from college in 1968, and a great mentor to me there was Barbara Rose, and because of being sort of educated by her, I saw a lot of those shows in the like I saw Eccentric Abstraction in 66. So as a very young person, I was learning about all of this work, and so Paul Waldman said, "Hey, why don't you do a show for us at SVA on Eva Hesse?" And I said, "Oh, okay," and worked with Donald, and we did this wonderful small show. And then Paul said, "Why don't you propose it to the Guggenheim?" And I went to Diane, and she said, "Yeah, let's do that." And I can only emphasize, as many of you know, how different the art world is. Can you? I was 26 years old. I had no degrees. I'd never done an exhibition. And I loved art, and I was eager and enthusiastic and ready to learn. And so with Diane's support and Tom Messer, who did not know Eva's work, he said, "Well, as long as Diane will support you, we'll go for it." And I remember the summer, the show opened in December of 72, and that summer the work was in storage in the city somewhere. And so I took Tom Messer to see it. He didn't know it at all. And as you probably most of you know, the exhibition was on the top 2 ramps of the museum, which was ideal for her work, just ideal. And after Tom Messer saw the work, he looked at me and he said, "I think you've picked too many pieces for the space that you've been allotted, but you make the decision, and whatever you decide, we'll support you." Well, as a kid, 26 years old, to have someone, who was your boss say that to you was very, very important. And it was, it was an adventure. It was an adventure, but through Helen and through Donald, I got to know all of Eva's friends, and Saul, Mel, Bob Mangold, and everybody, Joya,
Sol LeWitt, Mel,
Bachner. Everyone was very helpful and kind, and ignoring the fact that I didn't know anything. So that's how it started.
But to maybe take this a little bit further, the show was called A Memorial.
Yeah.
And so there's something about remembrance or remembering, and then like you're the first person to go into this storage, wherever it is, and decide. So what in your mind was it that you wanted to get across to audiences?
Well, I think as a student and as a very young curatorial assistant, the work was so distinctive, and it was so, in a way, clear to me that it was this amazing mix of everything: abstract expressionism, minimalism, surrealism. It all came together in this incredible way. And so it was that I think that was the real motive got to me. And I thought, because she had just died, and I never knew her. She had died just 2 years before. It seemed like it was timely. It was time to acknowledge and focus on her work, which I want to say that being in the Guggenheim space was terrific, because it's so perfect for sculpture, and particularly sculpture like Eva's. So everything came together in a way that was very fortunate and wouldn't in a million years happen today.
The other thing that I don't think in a million years would happen today is the incredible traveling exhibition that came out of that exhibition, which, we've got, it was at Guggenheim, the Albright Knox, MCA Chicago, Pasadena Art Museum, and the Berkeley Art Museum.
Yeah. And we were connected because it was a small art world then, and we knew all the curators and the directors at those places. It was supposed to go to the Contemporary Arts Museum in Houston, and for whatever reason, I need to find out why it didn't. But it went, but it went to Berkeley. As you said, and I think many of those museums bought pieces from the show. The Guggenheim was given expanded expansion, as Helen knows, from the estate.
We're going to come to that in a bit, because I think that's very interesting.
And but there was this definite, again, because the art world was so much smaller, there was a network. We all kind of knew each other, and if I didn't know them, Diane did. And at Pasadena, I was asked to give a lecture. I'd never given a formal lecture before, and I did. I gave a lecture on Eva Hesse at the Pasadena Museum, just because it was possible. Mm-hmm. So yes, and it meant that the work really, and I think the new book covers the different sites where it traveled to, and you see the different installation shots. And it clearly had an impact on all of those communities, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's astounding now to think about how, because after Eva passes, 2 years later, there's 6 major museums across the country that are presenting her work to audiences that have never seen anything like it. Yeah. So I know beside you've got the catalogue. Just can you? It's like because this is the original catalogue from '72,
and it's very dog-eared. Is that the expression?
Totally out of print. It's totally out of print. I have 2 copies. I have my own, and after my stepmother passed, I inherited hers.
And you can see I've marked it up and I've used it a lot. And Robert Pincus Witten wrote one essay and I wrote the other essay. And again, we had everyone's cooperation, and it was, again, I'd never written an essay for a museum catalog before. And the staff at the Guggenheim were, the editor in particular, Carl Furstein, very, they brought it up to snuff, which I don't think it was originally. And but it was a great experience, and it's and you notice that there's hardly any color. I think there's only one reproduction in color, because the Guggenheim was trying to save money, or claimed they didn't have the money, and one of the things that surprises me in retrospect, if you look there are acknowledgments at the beginning, and which come from me, and it's signed. LS. Nowhere does it say that Linda Shearer organized the show. So that's how kind of goofy the whole thing was, and. But it's a wonderful catalog, and it was we had a great designer.
No, it's incredible. And then 20 years later, in 1992, there is Helen Cooper at Yale University Gallery, and that's where Eva went to school, wasn't it? You organise, yes. So that's where you organise the show called A Retrospective. That is, 20 years, it's a long time. We kind of slip quite quickly, but 20 years is a long time in this situation. There were 2 shows in between. There was one at the Whitechapel in London, and there was one that was more focusing on the drawings. So can you talk a little bit about your exhibition 20 years after that? And, just start wherever you want to start, and I'll noodle in between. Do you have a microphone?
Oh, you're sitting on it. There it is. Oh, really?
Well, I had been curator for quite a number of years, and my exhibitions up until then had to do with artists primarily of the 19th century. And one day I was in LA visiting some collectors, and I had an afternoon free, and I went to what was then called the Temporary Contemporary in LA. And there was an exhibition of I think the title was something like Art of the 60s or something like that. And I wandered through, and I came on a little alcove on the right. I can remember it as if it happened yesterday. And there was, sitting on the floor, there were a bunch of fiberglass vessels. Turned out to be repetition 19, but I didn't know. I just looked at these things. I had no idea what they were. I had to look up the name of the artist, Eva Hesse. I guess I had heard of that name, but vaguely. But I was so moved by these works of art, or this work of art, I couldn't get it out of my mind. And it was so different from everything else that was in that exhibition, which is primarily minimalist stuff. And so when I came back to New Haven, and when I discovered that Eva had gone to the Yale School of Art, I thought, this is meant to be. We have to do an exhibition on this woman art. And I was very lucky because there was a curator at the time of modern and contemporary art in the gallery. And I said to her, well, what about Eva Hesse? And she said, I'm not interested in that artist, which was the best thing I ever heard. And our director was very sympathetic or positive and said, go ahead, do it. And so I had to immerse myself into art of the 60s, try to understand Eva Hesse, where she came from, what impact the Yale School of Art had had on her. And then do this exhibition, which I wanted to, I knew about already by that time. I had studied what had happened at the Guggenheim and the other exhibitions, and I thought, what kind of exhibition should we do here? And I thought it was very important to show Eva Hesse's work from the time she was a student at Yale, because from that moment you could see what was intensely important to her. Joseph Albers was one of her professors. He liked her very much. He was also a immigrant, and he would speak German to her. And apparently when she would come into class, he totally disapproved of what she was painting. She was painting very expressionist subjects. And he, of course, as you know, was completely committed to a very theoretical approach. And whenever she would come into class, he would say to her, well, let's see what Eva has done today. And she admired him, but she didn't agree with him. He admired her, but he didn't agree with her. But he was tremendously supportive of her. And I thought it's very important for us to have some of the work that she did, not necessarily as a student, but shortly afterward, when she had her first exhibition in New York of drawings, to show what the roots were of her expressionist approach to sculpture. And that led me to organize an exhibition based on, beginning with the early pieces, the early paintings, and then moving into the sculpture. And what I discovered, just as Linda did, all the people who were her classmates or friends or admirers, Saul, Mal Faulkner, Joya, Natalie Spector, all of these people who knew her, some at Yale, some were just her friends. It was this fantastic community who all loved her and admired what she had done and recognized her achievement. That was so amazing to me. And so I went to see every single object I could. This was going to be a very expensive exhibition to mount. It's going to take the whole first floor of the Yale University Art Gallery. And so I applied to the Henry Luce Foundation, which had been very supportive of my other exhibitions, but they were not known for supporting something of contemporary art, you can be sure. And so I did a presentation to them, and sure enough, we got a very large amount of money from them. And then, thanks to Helen, we were able to produce a catalog, which I regret I forgot to bring, totally in color. So every single object in that was in that exhibition is reproduced in color, thanks to Helen. And
Can you get that one today?
what?
Can you get hold of that one? Is that out of?
Send it to you.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll scan it for everyone.
I'm really sorry. I meant to bring it, but I didn't. But it was designed by a graduate of the Yale School of Art, a graphic student. It's a beautiful catalog. It won some award. But I then decided who should write for the catalog. And I wanted to break the hold of thinking of Eva Hesse only in terms of feminist art. And so I carefully chose the writers. And among the writers was Robert Storr, Maurice Berger, people who spoke about different parts of Eva's life. Linda Norden spoke about Eva's work in a textile factory and how that probably influenced her affinity for materials and the use of material, things like wool and ropes and stuff like that. And so Anna Chave wrote about Eva in a different, wonderful scholars, wonderful writers, and that was how we thought of the exhibition. This is a full artist, a complete person, not just a feminist. And as you know, or many of you know, in her famous interview with Cindy Nemerov, the critic, she said, excellence has no sex. And we kind of adhered to that. And I can only say that it was one of the most inspiring, wonderful exhibitions I have I ever did, and I did some terrific exhibitions that were very fun to do, were important, but I don't think any was as transformative for me as a person. It gave me an insight into a kind of art that I was not dealing with, and I met fantastic people. But I will say that one of the most gratifying parts of this exhibition, as Linda and I were talking about, were the number of students from the Yale School of Art and elsewhere who found themselves in the exhibition totally engaged with the works of art. They would stand in front of these things, argue about it, discuss it, wonder. The number of young women over the years who've come to me and said that was a transformative exhibition for me. And I think it was one of the greatest privileges of my life to be able to work on that exhibition. Every single person, Barry was incredibly generous. Robert Miller Gallery couldn't have been more helpful. Oberlin College that held the archives just opened up, whatever I wanted. It was a time, as Linda said, I don't think it would happen today, certainly not in that open-minded, generous way. And it was just a fabulous experience. The show traveled to the Hirshhorn, and I can only say it's sort of like, thank you, all the spirits of the world, for giving me the chance to work on that exhibition.
Is there what is it that you learnt about Eva's time at Yale School of Art? Because I think you're one of the first people to really kind of dig into that, aren't you?
Well, she sort of lived her art. I mean, she, for example, one time she went to a local wetlands and gathered all these grasses and she lived in an apartment in a building right next door to the Yale School of Art called El Dorado. How's that for an aspirational name? And she filled her little one-room apartment or two-room apartment with grasses. And it was that kind of great sense of freedom. She took philosophy courses in Yale College. I mean, she just seemed to find herself. The summer before she came to Yale on a scholarship, she had given a scholarship to the Yale Summer School at Norfolk, Connecticut. And she did a number of prints at that time. But when she came to Yale, I think she really found herself. Her diaries from that time at least reveal somebody who was fascinated with everything, loved, as I say, loved arguing with Joseph Albers. She was fearless, and it didn't matter that the rest of her classmates were doing a different kind of art. Darn it, she was going to do what she wanted to do, and she was supported in it. And when she went to New York and had her first drawing show in 1961, it was a very, I don't have the catalog, but they were different kinds of works of art, and very well reviewed. Her classmates seemed to be, I think they were all, as a group, tremendously supportive of one another. And there was something about her, apparently, that just made people feel protective and caring about her. And so when we had our opening, the number of people who were both in tears that she was no longer there, but who could laugh about the experiences they'd had together. The men were all crazy about her. And she must have been a really important presence in that particular class.
Thank you. So to shift gears slightly, I want to come back to expanded expansion. And we're going to have a session later that talks about the conservation of that. One thing that I've learned about Eva's work from the many experts that I've spoken to is that the work is still alive, very much alive. And so much of this is about what you do with that living material as it continues. So we'll hear about that later. But I wanted to ask you, Helen, that work was given to the Guggenheim in 1975. So it was after the tour of the work when it was part of the memorial show. And I noticed that it's one of a number of works that have actually been a gift of your family and the estate. So maybe just to focus on expanded expansion and your kind of thinking, how did you decide the kind of generosity, again, it comes back to this, of how you're going to give works to certain museums?
I don't actually really remember, but it has to be the piece was large, the piece was monumental. The piece, we had no idea what was going to happen to the piece, but the piece belonged in a museum. And I guess we felt that regarding our experience with the Guggenheim during the memorial exhibition, that this was the place that should have it. And I'm sure Donald was very much involved in this. And but I agreed, and it was the right. Absolutely, in retrospect, it was the absolute right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And the same with other museums. Donald and I, and later, of course, Barry, we felt that the important pieces of Hesse needed to be in museums, not in private collections where they would be hidden or whatever. And that was our modus operandi.
Mm. Can you talk a little bit about how that developed over time? Because the number of places that now, I mean, when you look at this show alone and where those works are in permanent collections at the Wexner Centre, at Glenstone, very different places.
I don't remember the Wexner piece, how it happened. I'm sure it was Donald. And I do have paperwork of the things that went through galleries, but I don't know that piece. Mm-hmm. And the...
was it called Wexner?
No.
Ohio State something. No.
And the Glenstone piece belonged to a couple named Lauf, and it was a very important collection. But it must have happened. I really don't have any knowledge or any information about that.
So my last question, I want to kind of start with the three of you. It's a free-for-all. You can all jump in and maybe expand it out to some of the other experts that are in the room. As Russell said, this exhibition has been named after the title that you gave to your essay. And I think that it's looking back at a voice from the future. And so that there's an interesting thing that's going on, because if you speak to Bryony Fair or other people have talked about, rather than thinking about legacy, thinking about the afterlife of Eva Hesse's work once it leaves the studio. So on the one hand, we have this kind of afterlife and the aliveness of the work, but we also do have, as you have explained, a voice from the future that is still going. And there are many people here who are experiencing Eva's work sometimes for the first time. The expanded expansion, this is only the second time in 35 years it's been out. So most of us have not seen that work. So can you talk a little bit about how you see the future for the work, for the ideas, the people that you're talking to and thinking about, and based on your experiences, what do you think is this kind of legacy? Is it afterlife? Is it how do you see things developing?
Well, all right. What I noticed when we had our exhibition was the numbers of young women who came in, young women artists, some older women, but who, I think what she did, at least what I could see, was that she gave permission to be yourself. It was the heyday of minimalism. They would come in and they would look at these things which had a handmade quality, which was very important to Eva Hesse. When she did Repetition 19, the fabricator, she gave him some drawings, and he created them, and they were perfect. and she rejected them. She said, I don't want perfection. I want something that looks as if it has a life. And I think that quality of expressing yourself, to heck with what anybody else wants to do, that came through in our exhibition. And when I saw young women, especially young women, feeling that maybe they could express themselves in the way they wanted, and as I say somewhere, I think they took from the art world what they wanted. Eva Hesse took from the art world what she wanted, but she made it her own. She took it in a different direction. And I think that model, that road model for young artists, but certainly at that time for young women, was absolutely critical. And to this day, I will often meet someone who's an older artist who saw the exhibition and will say, that exhibition transformed me. I knew then that I really should do what I wanted to do, regardless of what other people said.
What do you think, Helen, Linda?
I think that, again, remembering from my perspective of 1972, I was following in a series that Diane had started of minimalism. So there was Mangold, Ryman, and Andre, and here was the first woman, and it was it wasn't. It was a political time, for sure, from the late 60s, but we were on the cusp, really, of the feminist movement. It wasn't in full force at that point. And so I think confirming what Helen is saying, that it was very, very important, and in 1972, especially for a younger generation of artists, to see work that was clearly very personal and coming from a sort of deeply felt concern and motivation was transformative. There's no doubt about it. It had an impact, and the fact that she was a woman really resonated in many ways, and it was very special.
And our exhibition was one generation later, 20 years later,
yeah.
And it still resonated with women artists in particular. I mean, there had inroads had been taken and made, but apparently the pressures were still on them, and they felt it. And she somehow spoke across the years to them.
Yeah.
And this is 2024, and look at this.
I find all the time that the young artists will come to me and say how important, what an influence this was on my work. And it's revelatory. Her work was revelatory.
Mm-hmm. So I'm giving you warning. We need questions from anybody who wants to have questions. And I wonder, Élisabeth, Fred, would you be willing, if we pass you a microphone, to add from the audience any thoughts that you have in terms of foundations or foundational thoughts around Eva Hesse, so that we can all hear from you as well? And then questions.
It's wonderful to hear all that you've said, and I had the privilege when I was 16 of seeing Linda's show when it was at the Albright Knox, and I made the pilgrimage to Yale for a day to see Helen's show and to San Francisco to see Elizabeth's show. And I will say that as a man, I was deeply, deeply moved. So I think Eva transcends gender. At the same time that last night at Hauser Wirth, I saw quite a few young women looking, and men, but looking like 10 minutes looking at Aught, or expanded expansion, and just looking and then coming back again 10 minutes later. And you just knew that these were young artists and they were trying to register the work. The thing I'd like to just mention is that at the Jewish Museum, we took on the biographical dimension of Hesse, and there'd been so much interest, you know, in a traumatic life, and there'd been sort of a lot of literalism in terms of this led to that, or this is why she made that. And we wanted to, you know, the JM felt like the right place to kind of show her work in a biographical context, but not to do anything kind of one-to-one. And so I think that resonated a lot with visitors. I know in my essay, in the book that's just been published, I had the pleasure, I went back into my old files at the Jewish Museum and I read the entire comment books. And I kind of mined them. And I think like this show in New York at Hauser and Wirth, there was, I remember somebody from New Zealand, an artist who had written in the comment book how much she loved Hesse's work, but had never seen it in person. And I think that's going to be true here, because these 5 sculptures, having them back, I can't believe they're here. You know, I didn't think Area would probably ever come back to New York from Ohio, certainly not Aught from California. It's just, this is a very, very special moment for the next 2.5 months. So.
Élisabeth?
I guess I would chime in and congratulate Hauser and Wirth for having the courage to bring back these late sculptures from the last years of Eva's life, because in many ways they are the most radical things she ever did. That she was using this material that she was not sure what would happen to it. And for many, many years, I think people thought that they would never see the work that we're having the chance to see at Hauser and Wirth again, because the work was going to disintegrate and should never be taken out to be looked at. And so I think the fact that these have come from many different places, I'm sorry the Whitney piece, which is from the same period, is not here, but it is genuinely too special and fragile to leave the museum almost. But this is the work that we have all been waiting to see. So thank you, Hauser and Wirth, Barry, Bryony, for realizing that.
Could you say a little bit about the SF Mamashe, because that's also in the book, isn't it?
I think I was enormously inspired by Helen Cooper's show. I took the train to New Haven to see it. I was working at the Whitney, and I was so sorry that it wasn't coming to New York, and I stewed on that for a while, and finally got the courage to try to have a show like this that had missed New York, because New York is Eva's hometown. And so anyway, that was the plan. And the show ended up being in San Francisco, but really I think it followed Helen's lead, which was brilliant in bringing back this early material that people had somehow done this kind of split in Eva's life between the sculpture and the works on paper and the paintings. And these were enormously important in understanding what she did, and just on their own, for their own sake. So we, like Helen, brought them all together and maybe pushed a little bit more into the end of Eva's life, I think. But that basically, we did, I think, pretty much what you did. And then the show traveled to Wiesbaden, which we should mention also has had a very great role in this, since they have been responsible for bringing the Catalogue Raisonné to life and being early European collectors of Hesse's work.
Could I just say something here about we were very lucky in that we got every single loan we requested, except from the Pompidou. And we were practically, I mean, we offered them everything, short of the Van Gogh. And they absolutely refused to lend it. They had just opened their new installation. It's one of the last pieces, it's 7 or 9 forms. But other than that, no one refused our request. And that it was just thrilling to see all these pieces brought together. And you could see the connections, and you could see the development of her ideas. And there was something so personal and immediate about it all. It was meant for a kind of private consumption in a way, although it was in a public space. But you felt her presence, her hand on everything. And I think that was one of the most outstanding characteristics of the work that a lot of people responded to.
So we're going to accumulate questions. We're going to accumulate questions towards the end, rather than have questions with each section, or like session that we're doing. And so we're going to take a short break. But before we do that, I want to say Barry Rosen has spent a huge amount of time, and again, I've learned this from other people over and over again, has spent a huge amount of time and energy. This show with Hauser Wirth wouldn't have happened without Barry and his persistence and just knowing what was important to bring together. And I know that, behind the scenes, there's a Barry Rosen for many.
Absolutely.
Excuse me, before we move on, may I just make a comment? My name is Robert Loeb. I'm a sculptor. When I moved to New York after graduating from college at Oberlin College, my girlfriend, who was a half a semester ahead of me, moved in next door to Eva Hesse. And I got to know Eva Hesse pretty well. And for example, one summer night, my girlfriend and myself, and we went out to the Hamptons because she knew de Kooning. And we went to de Kooning's studio. We looked in the window, and we couldn't manage to connect with de Kooning. He wasn't there. So time moved on, and we went to sleep on the beach, and we got kicked off by the cops. We came
Some
back
things
home.
don't change.
But I remember Eva, every time she'd make a new piece, her loft was right next to my girlfriend's. She would say, gee, I wonder what Saul is going to say about this. I hope he likes it. Tom Doyle lived across the street, and it was fascinating. She really helped me. I'm a sculptor. I like to drill holes, and I burnt out her drill. She got me started at 76 Jefferson Street, and she got me my first job with Stanley Landsman, drilling holes in mirrors. And so the last time I saw her was with Lucy Lepard at the show we were both in together, the Anti-Illusion show. And that's the last time I saw her. But I have very fond memories of her.
Could I just say one thing here? For those of you who are artists in the audience and the rest of us, when Eva was in Kettwig in Germany, that time when she accompanied Tom Doyle, she accompanied him as his wife. He was the artist and the star, and he'd been given a commission by this industrialist to come to this place. The guy owned factories, and Tom Doyle was going to create some sculpture, and Eva went along. And that's where she started to work in 3 dimensions, sort of fiddling with the stuff that was left in the factories, the pieces of metal and fabric and everything. But she wrote a letter to Saul, in which she bemoaned the fact that she didn't know what she was doing. She wasn't happy with painting anymore, and she just didn't feel that she had any direction. And he wrote a letter to her, which I commend all of you to read. It is a letter, it doesn't even have to apply to artists. It has to do with the time in your life if you think, what am I doing? It's not going anywhere, why bother? It is a wonderful letter in which essentially he says, do what you damn well please, and don't worry about what other people think. It is the best letter ever written to anybody about anything. And honestly, as I say, if nothing else, read that letter.
Where can we find it?
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. Google it, folks.
It's in our catalog, which I will send to you. But Robert Storr Robert Storr's essay in the catalog begins with that letter, and those are his words. This is the best letter ever written to any artist, anywhere, any place, anywhere.
So I want to say it has been an honor and a privilege to be here with you, and I can't honestly think of a better way to set up this symposium but the conversation that we've just had. So will you join me in thanking the three Jedis?
Welcome back. We're so excited for Area, Aught, Augment, Repetition 19, Expanded Expansion with Élisabeth Lebovici. Élisabeth Lebovici is an art historian and critic living in Paris. She was culture editor for the daily newspaper Libération from 1991 to 2006. Since 2006, she has co-curated a seminar at EHESS in Paris titled Something You Should Know, Artists and Producers. Since the 1990s, she has written on feminism, activism, queer politics, and contemporary arts. We're so lucky to have her here with us today. Please join me in welcoming Élisabeth Lebovici.
Do you hear me now? Yes. Hello. Thank you so much for listening with me to the beginning of one of Eliane Radig's Occam Ocean and Occam Rivers piece. Eliane Radig is an electro-acoustic composer, music composer. She's 92 years old, and since more than 20 years, she went to computer music, to the use of acoustic instruments, from the cello, the harp, the bassoon, the clarinet, and this kind of interest in sound, and not in music, but sound. Its harshness, its roughness, its beauty have accompanied me towards the preparation of this little intervention today. And seeing the show yesterday confirmed to me that that it was, there was a kind of reverberation of the works, to me at least, of Eliane Radig and of Eva Hesse, in terms that it's, they don't like music, they like sound and the reverberation of sound and the vibration and everything that you get your body into. So, in the times we live in, and we have lived in recently, the afterlife of artifacts have been more and more intertwined with our lives. Not only for the ways they travel through time, but also for imbuing and diffusing time as a vibration, as a continuous sound of the objects themselves extended into our bodies. We've grown more and more sensitive to the ways their survival fostered a relationship with others, things living through humans, endowed with being responsible and caring for them. We've just heard about that in that wonderful discussion you had for an hour, this beautiful hour before, about a community of friends who entrusted others, an assembly, literally, to curate work in co-creating it, echoing the Latin word cura, care, and the curators, who, under the Roman Empire, tasked in maintaining public works such as sanitation, transportation, taking care of the roads and the aqueducts. Sometimes maintaining or curating involves becoming and change. I'm thinking here about Zoe Leonard's Strange Fruit. Hundreds of fruit skins, bananas, oranges, grapefruits, and lemons soon closed after being consumed, like a memory to skin no longer there. I'm quoting Zoe Leonard. After an intensive investigation into preservation options, first freezing the decay, Zoe Leonard reached the decision that the fruit skins were made to decompose and that the organic process of decay should be allowed to unfold in public view. Time is still co-creator of the work, and decay indexes our interdependence. Time is a texture. Or many textures. Time is a skin. I'm also thinking, for instance, of the marsh ruins of Beverly Buchanan, enacting a tension between destruction and endurance. And I'm, of course, thinking of Eva Hesse, who a long time ago imbued her work with an afterlife vibrating with time. It's what this exhibition is about today. Even in the titles of the 5 shown pieces, you can feel that. Area, Aught, Augment, Repetition 19, Expanded, Expansion, Time as Sound. Doug Johns, Eva Hesse's assistant, who fabricated many of Hesse's works in fiberglass and latex, emphasized her deliberate inclusion. My interpretation of this is that it was her conscious decision to bring the fourth dimension, time, into her sculpture. Most historians have missed the point. Conservators, by holding the pieces in their back rooms and trying to stop the deterioration, are depriving the public of the chance to understand this dimension of Eva's work. This is Doug Jones, interviewed by Alison Rowley. For Bryony Fair, the co-curators of today's exhibition, when Eva Hesse begins to work with latex and fiberglass in 1967, she finds material that creates a dynamic of impure, tactile vision, varying the different thicknesses, and letting time change the latex color from yellow to dark amber or dark syrupy brown, in a way, writes Bryony Fair, of gradation in time. Time is gradation. So curating Eva Hesse is caring for such gradation, which also means beginning with and from the middle, adopting a nomadic perspective on her work. Such perspective acknowledges the changing focus or themes chosen, of course, but it also has to do with the ways time, the times we live in, allow the work to be seen or shown or visible or exhibited or unexhibitable. I'm quoting here art historian Vanessa Corby, who notices the unexpected reversal that occurs in our phenomenological encounter with a chronological installation of what, in Hesse's practice, can be brought together for exhibition today. Vanessa Corby cites the moment where an intense moment of her work in painting returned to reanimate what remained of her practice of sculpture. In such perspective that navigates in between appearance and disappearance, you deem to create new non-linear narratives where there are no steady point of departure and no steady endings, only rough edges. In this realm of thoughts, I cannot but notice, and I'm not the only one, because it was all about it today, and in the audience too, how much the notion of encounter counts when experiencing Eva Hesse. What is interesting in the notion of encounter is that you must situate yourself. It's reciprocal, me too. Therefore, that's what I'm going to try to do. Here, to attempt to do, trying to position these words in the midst of all the curations of Eva Hesse's works that are narrated in the beautiful book that's being published right now, whether through exhibitions or through catalogs and scholarly writings. Scholarly writings, I missed a page. Preparing our encounter with area, Aught, Augment. I'm going to cite the title a lot. Repetition 19, Expanded Expansion. So my most recent encounters are, so before yesterday, it was exactly 6 weeks ago when I was so lucky to see Woven Histories, curated by Lynn Cook at the National Gallery of Art in Washington. So I encountered here Ennead, 1966, acrylic paints and cord over papier-mâché and masonite. The title means a set of 9 gods of ancient Egypt, 9 sets of small hemispheres deployed on a rectangle as a grid that contains a string. Lynn Cooks reminds us that Eva Hesse, like Sheila Hicks, were former painting students of Joseph Albers, both being innovators who made sculptural work from soft materials, fibrous materials for Eva Hesse, which makes this work, says Lynn Cook, clearly distant from both thread, assimilated with female-gendered art like textiles, and such industrial standards at steel cable and wire than favored by Hesse's male colleagues. This perspective links such encounter to the critical reflection by Lucy Lippard, who remarked Hesse's recourse to such materials as radical gesture that skewed the self-referential effectlessness of the regnant minimalist aesthetic. And also, it goes back to Linda Norden, who, with the help of Sheila Hicks, tracked references of working in a textile factory in Germany, and to trace links from the jacquard loom to Hesse's metronomic irregularity. Before Lynn Cook's show, there was my encounter with Eva Hesse's studio work. I saw it actually twice, at the Camden Art Center in London and at the Fondation Antoni Tapies in Barcelona. What was really mind-blowing to me is how the work got rid of the pendulum of something and nothing, such as in the title, Aught, where the things exhibited sketches, trials, first traits for works to come. The radical perspective of the show said, no. Going back to afterlives, this perspective stated that if these things were sketches for a product or a project or an object, they were still entrusted with something, a becoming, testing and experimenting an activity, an artistic activity as such. The studio work is work without making a work, said Bryony Fair. They aren't promising anything. They have no name, no title, no function, no adequate description. There again, in the middle. But my encounter wouldn't be the same without other shows, other works which mattered. I'll only attempt to add one, which is actually 7, that enlightened for me notions at work with area, augment, aught, repetition 19, expanded expansion. The speculative question of amplification, of augmentation, the expanded expansion felt in the use of words that are called into citation and empower to make abstraction concrete. I'm quoting Eva Hesse. It's what's important to me, finding a quantity for myself and whatever problem I might get with it. I might find something else, answer some question, or find some form or thought, says Eva Hesse in 1969. So this is the 7th chapter of, and I will tell the title afterward, but I will talk about the quantity for myself is obviously at play in the abstraction of the work and in their relationship with their titles. Area, augment, aught, augment, expanded expansion, and repetition 19. Not in the same way. We'll go back to area, for instance, which you'll see in the gallery and which is made from the molds of repetition 19. So the augmentation is here completely embodied in the work. So are the titles and their ability to amplify the abstraction of the works by giving them something concrete to project onto. And here, in order to make it more concrete, I'd like to refer you to the title of the 7 chapters of Arms, Ache, Avid, Aeon, Nancy Brooks Brody, Joy Episala, Zoe Leonard, Carrie Yamaoka, Fierce Pussy, Amplified. This is the continuous sound of an exhibition organized from 2015 to the present by Joy Tang and composed of the iteration of the individual art practices by the original core members of the queer art collective Fierce Pussy and the collective power of the practice of Fierce Pussy, who has become a 5th artist. I'll come back later to the dialectics of amplifying and its institutional counterpart. But where I want to go for the moment is to 4 words, arms, ache, avid, aeon. They come from Carrie Yamaoka's 1991 piece, A is for Angel, which features works gathered from typewriter correction ribbons she collected from France. Pulling in the tear off, that's the resonance I want to meet. An afterlife that pulls in with what is left, with what we're left with, the left hand of darkness, maybe. What is left also accounts for the preparation of my encounter with the present show at the gallery. I was also left with titles, with the dictionary, with the thesaurus, with my misspellings, my ways of speaking, in a very crooked English, with a bad accent, and most of all, reproductions, many JPEGs of the works, captioned, described, and interpreted by many PDFs. How does one situate one encounter with a digital version of Eva Hesse? I think part of my job as a critic takes place in providing a texture to my imagination. So all the question I was left, is it warm? Is it cold? What is its degree of softness? What is its degree of harshness? Is it repulsive? What's their smell? How can I feel their size, their scale, their rhythm, their texture? So in order to help me today, I have brought here two theoretical operators. If you dare come with me to this place. One is Didier Anzieux Lemoipeau, in English translated the skin ego. And the second operator is Sarah Ahmed, queer phenomenology. So please come with me and we'll try to bring those theoretical operators to my help. Thank you. So I'd like to show first photographs of Eva Hesse. And of course, you have this incredible, iconic image of Hesse made by Hermann Lanshoff, artist Ruth Vollmer's brother, and where she's depicted on a couch amidst a pile of rubber tubing. Above, a work by Smithson and a collage by André. With the stuff on the table as index, she appears as one of her studio works, maybe. Some interpretations have mentioned a reenactment of the analyst's couch and identified the things on the table with Freud's collections of antique statues, thus considering the studios as a consulting room and the artist as patient. But what interests me even more there is that in every photograph I looked at in which Hesse appears, she is coated by materials of her work. She's coated by her works. She's touched by the works. In front of her works. She's also in between. She's also in the middle. Of course, one can understand such picture in the tradition of magazine spreads, where the artist appears amongst their work. But here, to me at least, it's something else. What is it? So, on the pictures, Eva Hesse is in contact with the work, in fact, being more and more touched than touching the work, or it's both. But she's not at work. She's not Hans Hofmann paints a picture, or de Kooning paints a picture, as the titles of the series of writings that appeared in Art News in 1950. The first one by Hélène de Kooning, the latter by Thomas B. Hess. There was a sort of disturbance in these articles in 1967 with the Art Forum article by Thomas H. Garver documenting minute after minute, Bruce Conner makes a sandwich. Here, I don't see that drama. I don't see the one of making even a sandwich documented. She's not making a work, she's in the middle, literally. She's inserting herself in it, or in between the work and ourselves. It's an indication of size, space, volume, situation, but it's also an orientation that she proposes. That is a moment in time and space, where in the studio or in the museum space, work is becoming performed. Lucy Lippard immediately encountered the performativity of the works and read it as interaction between art and life. Lippard quotes the interview of Eva Hesse by Cindy Nemser in 1970 when she says, First, when I work, it's only the abstract qualities I'm working with, which is the material, the form it's going to take, the size, the scale, the positioning, where it comes from, the ceiling or the floor. Hesse continues, however, I don't value the totality of the image on these abstract or aesthetic paints. For me, it's a total image that has to do with me and life. I can't be divorced because I don't believe art can be based on an idea of composition or form. Lippard quoted at length this moment of the interview and added, the sheer density of Hesse's confrontation with the materials of her life and art seems to have invested that art with an extra aesthetic force, almost a nervous tremor that manifested itself formally as well as emotionally. Think about the music. Thus, a formal reading of a work may be useful on one level, but it is necessarily dependent on a psychological reading, which in turn is dependent on the effect made by that form on the viewer, who must always remember that it tends to be one's own reading, not the artist's. So it's nice that when highlighting the psychological dimension of Hesse's art, Lucy Lippard acknowledges the beholder as an effect of what Bryony Fair calls the dramatization of the texture of seeing. Bryony further elucidates this notion of performance, arguing for Hesse unmarked use of color and texture. By foregrounding their temporal materiality, Hesse's works invite viewers to engage with, I'm quoting Bryony Fair, a radically corporeal and materialistic aesthetic. So I'm looking at Aught, but I'm also helped by the two works by David Hammonds and maybe by this work by Marcel Duchamp. I love to associate these gestures, what they cover and what they reveal. The use of the wall as an arena for sculpture, but also the way of covering the mirror, using, in the case of Eva Hesse, cheesecloth and latex as body. What do you mean by a body when certain lives are not considered human and the repetition appears endless? Let's go back to Aught. On the pictures of the former shows, which you have here, each piece of latex and cheesecloth appears much more as a cover, sagging upon itself seemingly with no inherent structure or strength. But when you see Aught in the gallery, here it's as if they had retracted, dried, being swallowed by the wall in a way. So we go from protective skin, from container in a way, to grafting and transplantation. And we're left with an incredibly complex experience that evokes the body, but no body in particular, the condition of having a body 4 times at once. The juxtaposition between being exposed and being covered is also at work with Augment. You have here too 19 sheets of latex painted canvas, each dog-eared sheet advancing to reveal a band of the underlying sheet. In 1968, at Castelli's warehouse, Augment's most salient feature was the turned-back top layer that, like a turned bed sheet, was creating a pocket of space at the fold. A pocket of space which is also a contact, a touch, skin to skin. This is my point. While never being acquainted with the manipulation of the handwork that makes the work, something incredibly corporeal happens, nevertheless, in the relation of the work to the viewer. So this is where my first theoretical help surges into the scene. Didier Anzieu's Moi Peau, Skin Ego, I don't like the title in English at all, published between 1974 and 1985, in which the psychoanalyst attempts to show that the first image of the self comes from a bodily imprint, a contact, an in-betweenness. In the first pages of Le Moi Peau, Skin Ego, we encounter what Didier Anzieux calls a more or less universal phenomenon in biology. I'm quoting him. With rare exception, the peel of all plants and the membranes of all animals, human included, consist of two layers, one internal, the other external. In the human embryo, for instance, its ectoderm forms both the skin, including the sense organs, and the brain. The brain, a sensitive surface protected by the cranium, is in constant contact with the skin and its organs, and the skin is a sensitive epidermis protected by the thickening and hardening of the parts nearest to the surface. So both brain and skin are surface entities, says Anzieux. The internal surface in relation to the body as a whole is in contact to the outside world through the mediation of an outer surface of skin. And each of these two casings consists of at least two layers, a protective layer on the outside, and underneath or in its orifices, another layer which collects informations and filters exchanges. This is where Anzieux, with his practice of Freudian theory and his own psychoanalytic practice experience, conceptualizes the skin psychic function. The baby's fantasies of having a common skin with the mother's is the concrete starting point for a development that through the prohibition of touching, the manipulation that we're not seeing, leads to, I'm quoting him, the capacity of the self to figure itself as self based on its experience of the surface of the body. This is what defines Le Moi Peau, the skin ego, characterizes by Didier Anzieux. Thinking and feeling, this is not a binary. So I'm looking here at something that for me, calls upon attention, the idea of the skin inside and the skin outside, and this this repetition of repetition 19 calls back again and again and again the idea of being contained in a container, and the idea of having a kind of double skin that is actually painted inside and outside. And I want to call also the work of Tony Feher in order to understand that content, in a way, the content of those containers is shaped by the skin, by the exterior, by the form. The content as a psychic content, too. So with Eva Hesse, embodiment, like the instrument played by the musician, the co-creator of Eliane Radik's Occams, is continuously augmented. And yet, it's what we're left with. To me, that's the tension of the work. I'm quoting Eva Hesse. It's area, and I have a personal feeling about this piece because it's made out of the mold of repetition 19. It's the insides that we took out and then made into another piece, totally. Eva Hesse continues, there's no connection whatsoever, except if you really saw it, it's very clear. You see, it's the bottom of the can, and this is around this wire mesh. It looks like the curve. That it is its part, and then that is its parts, sorry. And then I rubberized and attached them. I sewed them with wire, and that's the piece. It's totally irregular, and then it's all connected. I have a personal attachment because I took one piece and made it totally another one. This one was empty containers where you have that sexual connotation. It's anthropomorphic. You see here embodied the potential to break down the dichotomous elaborations of inside, outside, surface depth, self-other that often permeates accounts of embodied subjectivity, as Sarah Ahmed and Jackie Stacey write in their preface to the collective volume, Thinking Through the Skin. Thinking Through the Skin, the book draws heavily on the hypothesis of the skin ego, making clear that, like many psychoanalytic models, Anzio's theory is premised on a number of problematic assumptions about embodiment, such as being captured by the maternal body and, moreover, a pregnant body, and paying much less attention to how the moi-po might itself be on the site of social differentiation. It is towards Frantz Fanon, for instance, that one can turn in order to foreground the inscription of skin in power relations. In Black Skin, White Mask, published in 1952 in French, Frantz Fanon writes that racism is better described as the epidermization of inferiority than its internalization. Through this epidermal skin, as Fanon puts it, Black individuals are reduced to their skins through a right-scripted blackness. In other words, race has no depth precisely because there's nothing beneath the first surface, only a second surface. But let's go back to Augment, a 19 layers of latex painted canvas with their rippled edges. From skin to orientation. I'm quoting here Sarah Ahmed's Queer Phenomenology, my second help, Orientations, Objects, Other. As I've suggested, phenomenology reminds us that spaces are not exteriors to bodies. Instead, spaces are like a second skin that unfolds in the fold of the body. So spaces impress on the body, create new textures, involving the mark of unfamiliar impressions, which in turn reshapes the body surface. So here's the cover of Queer Phenomenologies. It's to me what happens to all the works exhibited in the show. When you look at all of these works, they have, you know, you are very disoriented, and they look very disoriented too. Although they're very, you know, regularly posed on the beautiful floors of the galleries, there is something in our orientation which is very, very disoriented, a kind of non-straight orientation that happens to us. Maybe because the works are so present, are so potent, suddenly you feel extremely disoriented. And according to Bryony Fair, it is remarkable, states Bryony Fair in her introduction to Eva Hesse's studio works, it is remarkable that all of them, even more than experimentations with material, are investigations into the disposition of the elements. These were exercises in orientation, made on the assumption that the layout would most probably change. Trial and error, horizontal or vertical, or simply propped against a wall. More often than not, the works ended being oriented quite differently from the model. Her notes are full of questions to herself. That sense of oscillation between wall and floor is always present in the work. Smithson called Hesse art vertiginous. But you don't see the vertigo of orientation. You find it more, to me at least, in the push that Eva Hesse gives towards expanding, augmenting, repeating, landscaping the corporeality of the work. this abstract excess of quantity pushed toward what Hesse calls quality. I think that piece is strikingly ridiculous, and that's its best quality. That's, I'm quoting Eva Hesse. So I think there's something there going from quantity to ridiculous, to absurdity, to quality, that qualifies the queer orientation of Hesse's work. From horizontal to vertical. Eva Hesse said about expanded expansion, the 43 feet drapery is made of latex called cheesecloth, supported by hand-formed fiberglass poles looking like a curtain. You could put this very narrow or wide apart, she adds. So there's already movement, nomadism, in the orientation of the work. Your somatic engagement, looking alongside the uninterrupted partition, sorry for the oxymoron, and imagining the body of the sculpture being drawn or pulled one way or the other, as a curtain would be. This double engagement performs the quality of the title, which gives the piece its form, expanded expansion. Orientation involves different ways of registering the proximity of objects and others, or as Zaha Ahmed states in her introduction, orientation shapes not only how we inhabit space, but how we apprehend this world of shared inhabitants, as well as who or what we direct our energy and attention toward. A phenomenology turns us towards things in how they reveal themselves in the present, and also how we may need to follow such things. Phenomenology helps us to consider how sexuality involves ways of inhabiting and being inhabited by space. But Hesse had also another term for this disorientation. She called it absurdity. She could also, and she did call it, area, Aught, Augment, repetition 19, expanded expansion. Absurdity is what links art to life. That's what Eva Hesse says. That's her story. You won't believe it. I was told by the doctor that I have the most incredible life he ever heard, she tells Cindy Nemser. Nothing in my life had ever been normal, and the only time I ever felt secure when I was doing my art. Again, I'm quoting Hesse. It's the formal principles are understandable and understood. It's the unknown quantity from which and where I want to go. As a thing, an object accedes to its non-logical self. It is something, it is nothing. It is all that non-logical dynamic that the work activates, operating in numerous iterations. I should actually move a little bit because I think you're a bit fed up. So, yeah, I would like to go back to this idea of the addendum, so the thing added, the thing that's augmented, the thing that's amplified. So with Eva Hesse, too, the institution is called into a challenge. Elisabeth Sussman, in the text introducing her exhibition, says, or in the text around her exhibition, says, I wanted to see that work. I wanted to know in what kind of state it was in. I wanted to know whether people were making the right or the wrong call about not showing it. I wanted to know about exhibitability. exhibitability as unknown quantity. I think it's one of the quantities that go into this addendum, augmentation, this citation, this seriality of the work. And you maybe will understand that my only question to Russell and to Barry Rosen was why? Why there? Why there? Why now? Or maybe how there? How here? How now? Co-organized by Barry Rosen and Bryony Fair, the show at Hauser Wirth assembled 5 very uneasy pieces by Hesse, which all belong to museum collections, were gifts and belong to collections. And they're taken care of in those collections. So why to reanimate them in a gallery? Why? Certainly, it is a new framework that is projected in the light of a now unto such work. And it gives the 5 sculptures an impulsion provided by the title of the show, Eva Hesse, Looking Back at a Voice for a Future. But what future? No one is imagining the future very well. And when we try, it feels like a nightmare, says Judith Butler in Who's Afraid of Gender? And Judith Butler continues, imagining the future is not precisely a prediction. Imagining does not take place only in the mind. It requires an object, a medium, a sensuous form of expression. Imagining the future is more like the release of a potential through a sensuous medium, where the medium is not a simple vehicle for an already formed idea, but an idea that takes hold and assumes shape, sound, and texture, releasing a potential of its own. This potential, I find it in the living membranes of the 5 sculptures that interlace with me, and I hope with you, are precarious, disoriented, interdependent textures of life. Thank you. Sorry, I was a bit moved, and sorry for all the mistakes I made, and sorry for reading. It was a bit. Questions? Well, yeah. Or maybe. Okay. Yeah.
That was incredible.
No.
Really incredible. You wrote that for this very moment. You wrote that for now.
Yes. You know, I should have begun. I should have begun with. I'm not at all a specialist of Eva Hesse. I've never written anything about Eva Hesse, you know, just my blog, and probably some articles for Libération. And I have seen not so many shows because I mainly live in Paris, Europe. And I told you the last shows I've seen, there were 2 big, it was a big show in the 90s in Paris, organized at the Jeu de Paume. You remember that? By Catherine David and Corinne Disrance, and it changed my life. You know, I'm saying as everyone, it changed my life. And then I saw the show, the big show, you know, at the Tate Gallery. That was the show that was coming from San Francisco. And I've seen museums and works in museums. So I tried to do what I said I do, which is, you know, so I was covered with JPEGs and covered with texts and covered with writings and covered with film and covered with, and my memories. And so how do you do to get into the skin of the works? Because it was that I wanted to do. And so I said, well, I'm going to talk about that, about getting in and getting out. And the fact that, for me, what is the most incredible is that the articulation of abstraction and the abstraction and the concreteness of the titles is rendered to me tangible through that texture. That's what I wanted to say, in a way.
Thank you. Welcome back for our final talk, conservation. Esther Chao joined the Guggenheim in 2006 and oversees the documentation and intake of new acquisitions and examines and treats works for exhibition and loan. Chao specialized in ethnographic and archaeological materials and worked at the Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology, Harvard University, Cambridge, Massachusetts. She was an Andrew W. Mellon Fellow in Object Conservation at the National Museum of the American Indian, Smithsonian Institution in New York, and held internships at American Museum of Natural History in New York and the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Chao received a BA in Art History and Anthropology from the University of Arizona and an MA in Art History and a certificate in Conservation from New York University Institute of Fine Arts. Lena Stringari has been Deputy Director and Andrew W. Mellon Chief Conservator for the Solomon R. Guggenheim Foundation since 2010 and 2008, respectively. Across her full career at the institution, she held various other positions in conservation of contemporary art, exhibitions, and paintings. A recognized leader in the field, Stringari's work at the Guggenheim spanned conservation, scholarship, curation, mentorship, and public service. Most recently, she curated the 2022 exhibition, Eva Hesse Expanded Expansion, overseeing the treatment of a work previously considered unexhibitable. She was instrumental in establishing the Variable Media Initiative, which emerged in 1999 as an innovative preservation strategy for media-based and performance works. Under her leadership, the Guggenheim established one of the first labs for time-based media preservation in the nation. More recently, she oversaw the Ponza Collection Initiative, a 10-year curatorial and conservation research project focused on minimal and conceptual works from the 1960s and 1970s. Stringari also developed Art Detectives, an innovative summer program that exposes teens from across 5 New York City boroughs to the intersection of art and science. She has lectured and published extensively on materials and processes of various artists, treatment strategies, and conservation ethics. Stringari served as the executive team liaison to the Guggenheim Green Team, an interdepartmental team that has embedded sustainability practices throughout the institution. She is also a member of the International Working Group for the Bezoe Green Protocol Refresh, which establishes greener guidelines for environmental conditions and collections care. Stringari will be joining the National Gallery of Art in Washington in July 2024 as Chief of Conservation. She is on the board of directors of the Time and Children's Art Initiative and the Art Advisory Council of the International Foundation for Art Research. She was a founding member of the International Network for the Conservation of Contemporary Art and an adjunct professor at the New York University Institute of Fine Arts for many years. She holds an MS in Art Conservation from the Winter Thur Museum, University of Delaware, and a BA in Art History from the University of Pennsylvania. Barry Rosen is a curatorial consultant and advisor to the Estates of Eva Hesse, Alan Caprow, Lee Lozano, Dieter Roth, and Ida Appelbrug. He was on the founding staff of the new museum and has contributed to several significant exhibitions, including Eva Hesse, a retrospective curated by Helen Cooper at the Yale University Art Gallery, and Eva Hesse, organized by Dr. Petzinger and Elisabeth Sussman at SF MoMA, Museum Wiesbaden, and Tate Modern. He is also editor of Eva Hesse Diaries and Eva Hesse Exhibitions 1972 to 2022. Please join me one last time in welcoming Esther Chao, Lena Stringari, and Barry Rosen. Should be on.
Can you hear?
Yeah. Good. So we have a very straightforward program because we're just going to see a bit of the history of the Guggenheim's engagement with expanded expansion, and then move into the incredible task of bringing it back to us. So maybe you can start.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry for that very long bio. I think you just took that from the press release that went out. Anyway, we have a great two presentations today and a hard act to follow. So I will just say thank you to those of you who did those presentations. And we are really standing on your shoulders because what you did before it really informed everything that we did, including some others here like Elizabeth and Fred and Barry. So I'm just going to try to give you. There's a long narrative around expanded expansion, and I'm going to try to make it as concise as possible. But for me, this has been a very long passion project. I started at the Guggenheim in 1992, and right before I started, I took the pilgrimage to Yale to see Helen's show, and it reminded me, because I started in art school right after Eva Hesse passed, that her work was very instrumental in my very short career as an artist. But what was interesting to me when I saw that show, and I knew that there was expanded expansion at the Guggenheim, something clicked in me, and I don't know how many of you are artists, but there is this thing that happens in the studio where you're working with materials, especially if you're someone who is interested in materials and how to manipulate them. And it's almost this visceral reaction that you feel, these tingles, that when you are working on materials like that, they kind of speak to you. And I just think Eva Hesse has that in spades. And so when I saw that exhibition, it just floored me. And then there was the piece that I can never remember the name of from Australia. What is it called? Contingent. Thank you, Contingent. And it just blew me away. It has the same materials that expanded expansion is made of. And I thought, I'm going to the Guggenheim and I'm going to get that work out. So that didn't happen right away, but in the 90s we had a number of conservators come and look at the piece, and in a minute you'll see the way that it was kept. Oh, I just wanted to show these really early images of Linda's show at the Guggenheim. And on the left, wait a second, what am I looking at?
Push one more time.
Okay, there you go. So that's expanded expansion in the memorial exhibition on your left, and during the tour. So it went to, as you know, Berkeley, Albright Knox. So those are a couple of images of it. And you can see the translucency and the light that's coming through the piece. Here again, expanded expansion was shown in our anniversary exhibition in 1988, and you see it there on the rotunda floor. So on the right, you see what it looked like in 1977, and at the bottom in 1988. And in 1988, that was when it went into storage and never came out until 2020 something, when we started to treat it. Well, that's not true. Some of it came out for this amazing
symposium that Élisabeth organized around her San Francisco show. And you can see the piece as it was sitting in its very well-intentioned storage. I hate to say it, it kind of looks like a coffin. So it would come out and people would look at it and go, oh, it's in terrible shape, it can't be shown. That particular day, we had everyone from Linda and Elizabeth, Helen was there, Saul Witt was there, and there was this amazing conversation, and that's a very young Scott Rothkopf there on your left. But there was this really deep conversation about what is this piece now? What is the future of this piece? This whole idea of the afterlife, and is it viable? Is it exhibitable? Can it be treated? And this went on and on. It actually has gone on for years, this conversation. So it was addressed. We had this roundtable, and that is all published in Elizabeth's San Francisco catalog. So if you want to hear the conversation, you can read it in that catalog. And what was interesting is that it was all over the place. Everyone had a different perspective. Some people were like, this is so amazing, it has to be brought back to life. Saul was like, this is not something that Eva would ever want to see. And, he was such a dear friend that we were like, oh, dear. And then Gioia Timpanelli, who was her very, very dear friend, was like, absolutely, she would really love to see this piece again, I'm sure. So, we as conservators were like, okay, we called all the experts here. and we left with the idea that we needed funds, we needed space, and we needed someone who was willing to attempt this. And unfortunately, we couldn't do that in the time it took to show it in San Francisco. But it did end up being impetus for us to continue working on it. And Michelle Barger there, who's an amazing colleague who was at San Francisco at the time, has done a tremendous amount of research on Eva Hesse, and she worked closely with us on this project. And you'll see, this is Doug, right? Yeah. So this is Doug Johns in the center here, and he is the assistant to Hesse that made Expanded Expansant, and he was still alive at the time. So Michelle and I went out to Topanga Canyon, and we actually made a piece of it. Oh, let me just go back a minute, because a number of curators at the Guggenheim and elsewhere thought, why don't you just refabricate the piece? You know what it's made of, and we were not so excited about that, just because I had read a ton of her writings, and it never felt right to me that someone else would make the work. But we did this in order to understand how it looked and how it's sort of the way that Doug worked with Eva. We were trying to sort of get that from him, and Tony Gans, the filmmaker, came and he filmed this whole process, and we and there we are actually making a piece of it, but it was
strongly ammonia.
Sorry. And there were dogs, and there were so it was not a museum. It was not a museum quality situation, but neither is the artist studio. So we were able to make these panels, and ultimately, in the end, I think none of us felt that was the way to go. So we came back, and then the Getty in 2008 did a major symposium around the object in transition. And I think in the conservation world, the idea of this living being has become something that everyone is starting to accept. And I have to say that this was another instance where we had people in the audience who were like, this is dead, and why are you even talking about this anymore? We've been talking about this for years. And others who were still trying to have this work come back to life. So what was this for the symposium, we we put the 2-panel piece, because the piece is made in several different panels, we put in a sort of framework or cast or however you want to say it, so that it could be stood up. And then we showed the piece as it was laying in the storage, and then we showed our mock-up that we made with Doug, so that the people, the scholars, art historians, conservators who were at this symposium could look at all those things and have a real conversation about what might happen, instead of just looking at this piece laying in its structure. And there's the group who was talking about it, and Élisabeth is there, and she was really instrumental, and I think convinced our curators that this was worth looking at again. So this is a very famous quote that Eva Hesse, and I can't actually see that far, so do you want to read it?
The quote?
Yes.
My glasses aren't that great either. At this point, Hesse wrote, "I feel a little guilty when people want to buy it. I think they know, but I want to write them a letter and say it's not going to last. I'm not sure what my stand on lasting really is. Part of me feels that it's superfluous. And if I need to use rubber, that is more important. Life doesn't last, art doesn't last."
Thank you, Esther. So it was a profound statement, and it has also been interpreted in many different ways. It's vague, right? It doesn't give you the answer to the question, but it also makes it very clear that she was intentionally using these materials because they were giving her what she wanted to do. She saw things sitting on the sun, on the window, that were darkening. So none of this was like, oh, I know that this is going to last forever. She never thought that. And she knew that things were going to change. And she was also very interested in chemistry, which for us as conservators is really interesting, because she went to these lectures that they did at Bell Labs, and we actually found notes that she wrote about the chemical constituents of all of these things and what that meant, and why are they rigid, and why are they flexible. So, also for us there was this affinity with her and her interest in materials. So there you see all the different states of the work. And in 2022, I curated the show in collaboration with Richard Armstrong, who was the director at the time, and Esther, who is the magic hands behind this treatment. And she'll tell you a little bit more about that. But this was not a planned exhibition. We managed to get a grant from the Bank of America to do this treatment without any intention of showing it at the time, but we wanted to see, can we do this? So we started to do that, and then one of the towers at the Guggenheim Museum opened up because something fell through, and there was this tower, and we had started the treatment, and it actually looked like it was going to be successful. So we were given this slot, and it was a very quick implementation of an exhibition. It was not a very quick treatment, but in terms of getting the loans and all of these things, and people were very, very generous. And I didn't want this to be about conservation only. I mean, it did have a very strong conservation component, but once we had the piece installed, it was about the piece and not about the treatment. So in the back room, we had this wonderful film which you saw when you were coming in, which gave you the whole story of the treatment. But in the front room, we had the piece, and then we had some of those studio works, and in some cases, and we had some of these wonderful writings from her book from her journals about the chemistry and the materials, and we also had the Cindy Nemser, the original audio from that interview, so that you could actually listen to her words, and then there was this amazing film that we had redigitized that. Thank you. Dorothy Beskind had done in her studio. So you actually saw her working, this passion that she had for her work. It was so moving, and I think it also, the show became about her sort of love of materials, and almost what I've always loved about the work is the zany quality and the serious and zany quality of the work, and how those two things can exist together. So I hope that came across during the exhibition, but that's what we were trying to say. And really not focus on the fact that the work had deteriorated and death and young, all of that stuff that everybody has always talked about. I really think the work held up on its own without all of those stories surrounding it. So I'm going to turn it over to Esther to talk about the materials and the amazing work that she did to bring it back to life.
Oh, thank you. Now, after all that, let's get into the real technical parts of the project. So I just want to say that it's been such an amazing and special opportunity to have been able to work on such a important and monumental work by Eva Hesse for such an extended amount of time. The conservation project basically took place continuously from 2020 to 2022, despite the pandemic. It was a challenging time and a challenging project for everyone. But the end, this reward was that expanded expansion could be exhibited again after over 35 years of being stuck in storage, with really the uncertainty of whether or not the work could ever be shown publicly again, as Lena said, with these round tables and experts basically looking at it and going, it doesn't quite look like the original. So now it is very exciting to see expanded expansion being exhibited for the second time already since its treatment just a couple years ago. I wanted to mention that at the start, it really took a dedicated team and a dedicated amount of space for this rejuvenation of expanded expansion to even happen. The success was based on a team that understood the fragility of aged latex and all the steps we needed to take to be able to safely install the work. So I'd like to mention from the start that I worked very closely with a contract conservator named Linda Niebenhausen and our amazing Guggenheim mount maker, technical specialist Derek DeLuco, with the support of many art handlers from the Guggenheim, from Hauser Wirth, and also other New York art storage facilities. As Lena mentioned, the impetus that jump-started this project was in 2020 when Hauser Wirth generously gave us an open gallery space that we could work in and that could fit our largest section of expanded expansion into. And then fortunately, the next year, we received a Bank of America loan to be able to continue this project. So let's see, I guess I'll go back quickly. I thought I'd start off by describing a little bit more in detail how expanded expansion was fabricated and the visible process of how the materials were used. Just really basically, you probably all know, expanded expansion is a sculptural installation that measures about 10 feet tall by 21 to 25 feet wide. And of course, this is variable as the title implies. It's composed of 3 sections, and if you move from left to right, there's a 2-panel section, a 4-panel section, and a 7-panel section. And these are placed side by side and leaned against the wall. This is how the work has been exhibited historically. So far, the order has never been changed, interestingly, even though there are no specific installation parameters that we really have to follow. So this is interesting that, are we stuck on that, after, even though, it's called expanded expansion and there is variability to it, it seems like, we've been going with this 2-4-7 for a long time.
Did you try it at all, switched around?
Maybe in storage as we were treating it. I think things just happened to be in different order, but not really. Not really. Would have been interesting.
But there have been many conversations about bringing it around a corner.
Right.
Yeah.
So the upright posts that connect the panels are fabricated out of rolled woven fiberglass sheets saturated with polyester resin. This rolled formation imparts a strength to the 10-foot long poles. The tubes are then attached to long strips of non-woven fiberglass that create flanges down the posts onto which the rubberized panels are then attached. And then the panels themselves are made out of cheesecloth that are painted with liquid latex rubber, which you saw being made in Lena's video. And here on the corner left, you see a completed 2-panel mock-up facsimile that was made by Lena, Michelle, and Doug, which shows how expanded expansion would have looked right after fabrication. So you can see it looks very different from how it does now. I do want to point out that even though latex rubber is elastic and the work title is Expanded Expansion, the rubber panels themselves originally never did stretch or expand beyond their width because of the cheesecloth that was embedded into the latex. So that's something I think people think like, oh, it stretches, it must stretch, it's latex, but it doesn't. It's really how you place the poles. As Lena had also mentioned, that Expanded Expansion's last exhibition at the Guggenheim was in 1988, and the art went directly into storage. At that time, a custom crate was created and designed to support the latex as it continued to become less flexible and more brittle. This crate was constructed with a series of mounds, these curved mounds that you see, that intended to keep the panels at their, completely extended so that no unwanted creases or folds would then be frozen into the latex as it continued to stiffen and age. Over time, unfortunately, the panels developed a curved profile, and they no longer retained any of the soft draping effect of the original latex. And so as a material, we do know that natural latex rubber ages and deteriorates over the with exposure to light and oxygen. So it's really no surprise that Expanded Expansion and most of Hesse's latex works look the way they do. This inherent oxidation process of latex can cause a rubber to first become soft and tacky, and then over time it starts to embrittle and lose its elastic qualities. The color of the latex also starts to change and darken. It can discolor to a yellow, an orange, and even to a dark brown. So in these images, you can see some of the condition issues because of this embrittled latex that we had to deal with in Expanded Expansion. Things such as these open tears, splitting, losses, and cracks in the material.
If I may just interrupt for a second.
Sure.
One of the narratives was always, this can no longer support its own weight. So somehow, someone said that once, and then it just got passed down. It can't support its own weight. It cannot support its own weight. We can't lift it up. It can't support its own weight. And I think, when Esther and I decided we're going to try to do this, it became obvious to us that there were ways to do this that didn't require lining the whole thing or having this really heavy-handed intervention, which is what a lot of conservators had come up with over the course of these conversations.
Yeah, and the images will definitely show that how minimal the repairs ended up being, and of course completely invisible from the front. So if you didn't know if they were there, they would not be apparent at all. So in this slide, you'll see that given how brittle the latex panels had become, we were concerned that they would tear when we removed them out of the crates and tried to stand them upright. So our conservation strategy had two basic objectives. The first was to reinforce all the tears and the cracks in the latex by repairing them. And then the second was to create a handling frame so we could move the sections without damaging the panels in any way. For repairing the tears, we applied a fine non-woven polyester netting with a heat-set adhesive called Viva 371, for those who are interested, onto the backs of the panels. In the end, we applied several hundreds of these backing mends across the work just to ensure the stability of the latex. And in the photo, you can see just how many repairs were done just in that small area of one panel. So one panel times 13. Before we could adhere I do want to mention that before we could adhere these repairs, though, all the panel surfaces had to be thoroughly cleaned to remove a talc layer that was applied on the latex in the past as part of the finishing process, since latex still sticks to itself even after it sets. So even though this was done before, it probably wasn't noticeable when the latex was light beige in color. But as the rubber turned orange, this hazy white surface began to appear, and we had to remove that first. So, after stabilizing the latex panels, we had the big task of lifting this section out of their crates for the very first time after 3 decades. To do this, Derek, our mount maker, engineered a modular handling frame that was both lightweight and rigid, that was made out of a thin aluminum channeling that would then be attached to the posts. So on the left, you can see the work is being ready to be lifted out of its old crate. And on the right, the piece is attached to the handling frame, leaning against the wall. And in the front, you see the elaborately shaped old crate that it just came off of. I do want to say that working on the piece, oops. Cute. I'll give you that. The sheer size of expanded expansion was something we had to manage while treating the work. The dimensions of the size really gave us a sense of the physicality and labor that must have been involved when making the piece, and how the piece must have been handled in Hesse's Bowery studio by using flexible latex. Hesse could make expanded expansion monumental in size because it could be rolled or folded when it needed to be stored or transported. Of course, today we don't have that luxury. The latex doesn't do much besides just hang a little bit. So, when we were working on the platforms and on the ladders, just to reach certain areas of the artwork, this really gave us a sense of its oversized scale and the monumentality of it. If I get the next, please. Finally, after the treatment was completed, as if we didn't have enough challenges, the last challenge was to bring expanded expansion into the Guggenheim Museum. 2 sections of the work actually could not fit into the doorways of our building, so we had to figure out a way of folding the piece and making the dimensions smaller. Here you see the mechanism we used, which is still on this amazing aluminum frame that Derek built. What you see is the large 7-panel piece with custom-made balloon supports designed to cushion the vibration on the panels as it moved. And on the right, you see the largest section folded in half. And in the next...
A feat of engineering, I must say.
And in this, if you
by the way, when it was shown, when Linda showed it, it could just be folded on itself. So it could just be rolled.
I have a little video if you want to push play. Let's see if that works. Yeah. So it's just, I wanted to show the folding process, and you can just see how smooth and well orchestrated the maneuver is. So no cracking, no creasing. Yeah, it's just well-oiled machine. So thank you. And to conclude, I wanted to share some unique perspectives of the materiality of expanded expansion and the aged latex. After working on the piece for over 2 years, I really got to see some of the nuances and the beauty of the material itself, even despite the oxidation and the aging. So I thought I'd show these views that people don't really get to see when the art is on exhibit. You can see one of the surprises was that how translucent the panels still were. And in the next photo, you can see that light passes beautifully through the latex and the polyester resin, even though they look opaque in the gallery setting and gallery lighting. It was nice to see this translucent quality retained in the work, as this quality of natural latex rubber must have appealed to Hesse from the very beginning when expanded expansion was first made. So this is my journey and experience with Eva Hesse's expanded experience. And then, I don't know, Lena has a few exhibition shots from the Guggenheim if you wanted to look at.
Oh yeah, I was just going to take you through for those of you who didn't see the exhibition at the Guggenheim, because I know it was only up for a short time in the summer. So here it is as you're walking in, and there is the piece finally installed. And this is on the right, the Beskin film, which I think was really a highlight. I think that people hadn't seen it for a long time, and it's a beautiful film. And when it was re-digitized, it was just, you felt like you were in the studio with her, so it was really nice. And then we had some of these, what does Bryony call them? Studio works. So Bryony refers to them as studio works, which I think is a nice way to refer to them. And so we had Berkeley generously lent those, and above it you can't really see, but those are all the journal entries that had to do with material qualities. And there were quite a few of them. And of course we had a few of these. We had 2, actually, of these wonderful pastry cases that I believe Saul LeWitt at first put those into the cases, and which totally transforms those little pieces into something completely different. And here you see her just a couple of drawings about expanded expansion, and those are coming from Oberlin. But it's really nice because it's a little sequence of how she's looking at this. So she's thinking cast or plastic sheets on the floor or up. I mean, there's a whole dialogue going on here. And at one point she said that she would have continued to make this as large as possible if she hadn't been ill and had stopped. So it could have just gone on forever, which is also a sort of zany idea, but wonderful. And there it is again on the floor. So maybe there's a time when we need to show it on the floor completely. But And in the back room, we had the film that you saw when you were coming in. And then these, just through here, you see this wonderful contact sheet that was done for the Whitney exhibition. And it has her in the studio and her making the piece and the piece as it was. And that's Bob Fiore who did those. So we were able to get those and then blow them up. So, and that's it. So thank you very much.
You have questions? Because, I mean, you said initially we would keep all the questions at the end, but now everybody is that. So I suppose if somebody... Okay. Oh, sorry. That's Fred. Fred has a question.
Hi there. In the sequence of how the piece looks at different dates when it was on exhibition, what's really noticeable is about how the second panel from left, even by 77, is getting a little darker. And it's like this very noticeable progression. And I'm just wondering what you thought of that and what you speculated. I mean, with Sans 2, you know, where the panels went to different institutions, it's easy to imagine they were under different physical conditions, which is why they age so differentially. But here, in theory, they were all together all the time, and yet...
So we have a couple different theories, and you can add to them if I don't have your speculations in mind. But when we worked with Doug said that that particular panel could have been a test piece that they had done with a different formulation, and that it was hanging around the studio, and they used it because that was a test piece for expanded expansion. So it might have been a different formulation. It might have been hanging around longer. It might have been in the sun. The other potential possibility is that there was a time when this was rolled, right, and it had something at the top that was exposed. So it is possible that that ended up at the top of the roll and was more exposed than the other areas. But we've also done some scientific analysis, which we don't have definitive conclusions, but there's some interesting things about pigmentation that maybe Esther can elucidate. Do you know?
A little bit, and I think it also relates to why that one panel might be darker. Some scientists took some samples and looked at it, and there's a theory that as the rubber molecule ages, there are certain chemical reactions that happen, and some things make it progress quicker than others. And the thought is that maybe that panel that's darker had more of the talc placed on it originally, and that talc may have protected the rubber from exposure to light and oxygen and anything, pollution, anything that may have caused the deterioration of rubber to happen, advance quicker. So that, I think that's very difficult to prove because we don't know when the latex was applied and how much was applied on one or the other. In general, before cleaning the piece, we found the latex on both sides of the work, and it was all pretty much even.
And it's also possible because if you touch that one panel, it's thinner, and it's either thinner because it's lost a lot of material, or it's thinner because it was thinner from the outset. And if something is thinner, you're going to see the oxidation more readily. What is interesting, though, is it's thinner and more deteriorated, so it actually has more of a drape because it's so maybe in the end, as the rest of it continues to deteriorate, it'll get its drape back.
Well, thank you for doing this, because I remember when we did the show at the Jewish Museum, I remember Elizabeth out of the gate said, that work is not, it's ever going to be exhibitable.
Yeah, I'm just sad that it didn't make it into either of your shows, but, here it is now.
have a question over here. First of all, thank you for a fabulous day, and thank you for this last panel. It was really inspiring to see the process of conservation and the difficulties and the various steps you took along the way. So really appreciate the presentation. I had two questions. One has to do with how much testing did you actually do in terms of the makeup of the latex. You mentioned the formulation. How much do we actually know about Hesse's latex? What she used, what stabilizers she put in it, what she mixed into it, how did that evolve over the period in which she was using latex? There's different kinds of stabilizers for the latex. Which ones, did she buy a particular brand? What do we know? So that's one question. And then the second question had to do with your own role in this. Because it seems, that one of the questions at stake here is what are the character-defining features of this work that have changed over time? Of course, we mentioned the color, but the draping is also a character-defining feature that you've mentioned a number of times. And it seems that draping quality, had the work been left standing for those 50 years, would have just dried in place. And the decision 30 years ago to lay it flat and to put it onto these semicircular forms, in fact, gave it a new shape and
Absolutely.
reshaped the work. So the conservators actually remade the work of Hesse. So I want to know to what degree we can talk about that as now a combined work. That is both the work of a conservator and of Hesse.
Yeah, actually, this beautiful thing was done by an artist who worked at the Guggenheim, who I think very lovingly did that. And this was part of the narrative about it can't hold its own weight, right? So laying it down was supposed to so it wouldn't withstand this gravity. That this is a lesson that we've learned that almost everything that we do now, it stays in the configuration that it's supposed to stay in, not only if it's latex, but other materials as well, if possible. So yes, that, although there is a possibility that it could have stayed rolled up and then it would have been recreated in another way. So, it's a history. But you said something that I wanted to respond to. Now I'm forgetting what it is. Oh, yes, because when we worked with Doug, he said that he ordered exactly what he used so many years ago. But as you probably know, and we know from analysis, the additives in those formulations. It's not just the latex, but there are all kinds of additives. And those things change and they're proprietary, and it's very hard because they're small components of the latex, and it's very hard to identify what those are. But she wasn't adding things as far as I know. They were using it straight from the vat of latex.
Which happens to be Cementex L200. I think things that get stuck in your brain. I don't know how I pulled that one out, but
that's impressive.
And I think we checked back on the company, and it's already changed names, even though they have something similar. They say it's similar to Cementex L200. Unfortunately, I think with a scientific analysis of taking the old rubber and matching it to the formulation now, it just doesn't give us enough information about what the ingredients that are actually in the latex that she used. And going back to the crate, because of all these issues of that crate forming these unwanted kind of humps to the piece and reshaping it, we are now storing it, and Barry, you did see it when we were installing it. We're installing it basically looking like it is now, but on the travel frame and hanging. Basically, the panels do sort of hang freely now, and maybe over time they will slowly, start draping in some way, but at least they won't have that strong, unnatural curve to them.
I think gravity is already starting to do that. Even from the Guggenheim to Hauser and Wirth, they seem to have a little bit more debate. But I know what I wanted to address. This issue of, what conservators do and what is their role, this is something we take very seriously because one of the reasons we bring all these experts together in a room is that we should not be the final word on what is to happen. I want to be sure that these are like decisions that are made with a group of people. The exhibition that we did at the Guggenheim, I feel very strongly about transparency. I know that that's been a difficult thing in the conservation field, but I wanted this to be like, you come and you see this work and you can have any response that you want. And at the entrance to the exhibition, I posed all those questions. When is an artwork dead? What does this do to you? Is this creating some sort of mythical narrative by showing this work? Should we be showing this work? Like, I wanted the public to also think about what it means to care for cultural heritage and why you make certain decisions. And I mean, I was in that gallery many times where, especially artists, were like tears. So for me, I wasn't sure we had made the right decision. I was really excited because I loved the work, but I also didn't know for other people how they were going to respond to that. So whether it was successful or not is the eye of the beholder, I guess, right?
Have you had people complain that you fixed it?
I had people complaining when we were fixing it.
But what about since it's been done?
Since it's been done, I think people really appreciated it. I think they couldn't imagine that it would hold together like that. Because there had been so much talk about it for so many years.
On that creative homes, how did they keep it at the Guggenheim? Where was it all those years? There's another 15 or 20
It was
years.
all rolled on itself and stuck
Really?
to itself. And yeah, I mean, it was, that's how it was. That's why the talc, they kept putting on the talc so that it wouldn't stick. And, it was a different time. And that's how it came in. So,
Oh, so you did it.
Yeah, right. It's Linda's fault. No, but we also have all the notes from when it traveled, and it was tearing even then because people weren't handling it the way we're doing it now. So.
Well, the other question I had was on the crate. Was the part on the top the back or the front? Because you said you worked on both sides, so that the back was out. Oh, so that's a good
Right.
So that's another thing. No one could even see the front of it for
We just
35
assumed
years.
it looked like the back. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. It's been great.
Thank you for showing.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for being here. What an amazing afternoon. Please join us in the Roth Bar if you'd like to have a drink.